There's no question. I've talked to enough people to know that we do have a secret space program, and I'd be surprised if we didn't, just for national security reasons. In fact, you were talking to one of the people who has had a conversation with someone who worked in it, and it was my own father. When he left the Navy 6 months before his retirement, given full retirement, he went to work for Martin Marietta and Black Ops projects, and he said they were working on things that were 40, 50, 100 years ahead of what we were doing.
I fully agree, and I actually think we achieved the crucial breakthrough in 1956 when we achieved electrogravitics. And part of the new electrics in our data appears to derive from fundamental work that's going to slide out from the shadow ops and so on. Whether it will assist us through the hard times we've got coming, I don't know. But see, theoretically, you could build an energy shield against most of the effects that would be coming at you from the solar radiation and so on. I don't know that being out in space would protect you in that case, but if you have those kind of hyperspace drives, then you just sort of tweak over to another universe for a minute, stay in hyperspace, let it all happen, and then come back and rebuild. And that may be kind of what they're planning. But there certainly is a panic among the powers that be at the moment relative to these, what we can think of as a hard stop in 2012.
Annie, do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, yes. Do you still have your offer for the emails on Gary McKinnon?
That's true. Any serving military or serving law enforcement who wishes to take the risk can get a free copy of my report by just simply putting the word Gary McKinnon in the subject line and sending it to moon@halfpasthuman. And it's a free report, but bear in mind the cost is going to be that you will expose yourself to the interconnection software that the government is running to see who's talking to whom. And I'm doing it for my own purposes to try and aid Mr. McKinnon in his efforts here by muddying the database waters, among other things. But you will expose yourself to some level of risk because they listen to me. In fact, our phone has gone quite hollow, so we have at least one other active listener at the moment.
You mean right now as we speak?
Yeah, it came on about 20 minutes ago.
Interesting.
I have some stuff on my phone here, and I scrub my own lines and rebuild the phone lines all the time, and I've got some indicators here that indeed we get listened to all the time. And I've been told as much. I mean, I've had emails from guys that said, well, we were snooping on your phone calls the other day, and by the way, they don't identify who they are or anything, but they're sort of little needles to little jabs there.
Okay, before we move back into the McKinnon story, because I have a couple questions on that, I had a listener email me and said that I really didn't let you fully expand your ideas. So is there somewhere that you think we need to go with regard to this Webbot report that you think the average person needs to know about and does not yet?
The average guy, I don't know. Probably the email was referring to the idea of geographic safety here, and I was just going to say that really the safe place appears to be from the ancient knowledge in the Andes and maybe in the Rockies. Now, in terms of the report itself, it's very dire, and we're all going to live through it relatively soon. It does give you a good context, though, for the economic and how pervasive that's going to be. We're going to be hit by an economic blindsiding, if you will, somehow. Even though we all know it's coming, even though we're all sort of prepared for it, I suspect we'll all have an emotional reaction to it when it actually occurs that will be very akin to the unaware person getting slapped upside the head with it. It'll be that shocking. And from then on, it really starts permeating everything. Starts affecting the shadow ops, starts affecting, normal government, etc.
Food,
everything. The shortage language is already appearing. This is the bad part about the ill winds, because we actually forecast not events, but we forecast language showing up. And so every time we actually pick the language out, like the combination of ill winds and then the radioactivity, and lump them all together and say, we're going to see this appear in the future, well, I actually hope that none of that stuff ever occurs. And so I hate, at one level, I'm very disturbed emotionally when I receive these emails or read it myself, that such language actually occurs, where we see the forecast words show up, because we think of those as temporal markers, meaning that we're actually one step closer to that particular set of events and so on. And this particular set of events is not very good for anyone.
Well, it almost seems like this pole shift that you're talking about that will wipe out 98% of humanity might be a drama that plays out time after time after time, whether it's Lemuria, Atlantis, or today.
If you read Patrick Geryl's books, Geryl, he's a Dutchman, but he's got 3 books in English. If you read his books and also look at Robert Felix's books about the ice core stuff, you see that it happens periodically, about 11,500 years, and it extends out sometimes to about 11,900 years, and we're within that age at being 11,804 years. And unfortunately for us, there's this old pre-Egyptian tablet that seems to suggest that the longer the time between the shifts, the worse it is. So the fact that we have this extra 300 years is both a blessing and a curse. So, for instance, what if a pole shift had happened 300 years ago in the horse and buggy era, mostly around the planet? The recovery rate might not have existed. Might have been small. We might have, at this point, been really way back, and we might have had to go through the whole cycle again in very primitive state. However, now we find ourselves in a very nasty situation where the planet is littered with nuke plants, all of which are going to get very disturbed when we have these 12-0 earthquakes as the Earth shudders and shifts and potentially continents rise and fall. And so those don't augur well for survival. If you're really concerned about nukes, on a personal level, I deal with Bob Lazar at United Nuclear whenever I want to buy a Geiger counter. He does the best work I've seen.
Okay, very good. Well, we're up against the break, and when we come back, we'll put a wrap on this interview with Cliff. Stay with Dave and Annie, and we'll be back in just a moment. Our guest tonight, joining Dave and Annie on the Common Sense Show, has been Cliff from the Webbot. And Cliff, tell everyone how they can get a copy of the latest report.
Well, if you really want to be depressed, you can go and buy our 58 pages of dismal news there off of halfpasthuman.com for $10. I think your listeners probably are going to say, no, I'll put my money on pie and in a good cup of coffee.
Well, what's your advice to people? I mean, with these dire things that the report says are coming down the pike, what would your advice be to the average person?
Well, probably just ignore it.
Lay down and take your beating?
Well, no, be prepared for shifts between now and 2012 in the social order around you. Get a good attitude about that. Get centered in what's important with you, and leave out all the other extraneous stuff as not being pertinent to your life, like the healthcare stuff or what the stupid politicians are up to, because it'll be over soon, relatively.
Well, we are headed toward a social change of awareness, I believe, to combat some of what might be coming down the pike on the physical level, the economic, the government, the Fed.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, it'll probably devolve into something that, ends up being a violent replay of the revolution. I hope we don't get into that violence. I'd really rather see us, work more diligently as a species and do things like put energy into proving the sunspot hypothesis wrong. Just because we've located all these numbers and all these ancient texts, and it seems that our sun is currently going through this, and we have all this data, doesn't mean that there isn't some hope to us, but we're certainly not putting any energy towards it. We're getting involved in all this. Well, it has to be called bullshit. I mean, it's no good for anybody, the swine flu stuff and the propaganda coming out of the press and so on. And I talked to some of the other woo-woo guys, and I'll quote Jay Widener here, who said to me that, he thinks that the powers that be are treating the whole planet like a trash can or a sewer and just not really caring about it because of the short time and that we have relative to 2012. And if that's the case, then here you are swimming in the sewer that they're going to continue to create with their wars and pestilence and all this other stuff, when we have a hard deadline that's going to wipe everybody out. And it's a tough choice as to what you pay attention to and what you don't. At times I'm tempted just going out there swinging and just, get my revenge now while I've got a shot at it. At other times I calm down and say, well, humans have survived this in the past. And we even have indications that the Atlanteans spent 208 years building boats to survive this, and many of their boats did. So, it is feasible. Just have to be smart about it. I'm building a little 26-foot boat to take myself and a few other individuals through what has got to have to be the worst possible conditions that anybody ever has to face at sea, with a very low probability that we will survive. But that's the way the universe pushes me, is towards boats. So I just couldn't be a go find a cave guy. But I'm sure that there's people that the universe is pushing towards to go find caves, and they should probably listen to that.
Last question. Are you going to do another altar report?
We have no plans not to, but what we're facing is a combination of problems. I've got to tune the lexicon. I've got to go through 300,000 words and remove all of this stuff and rearrange it. It'll take me months. I don't know how long. And then my server guy, Igor here, he's got to replace one of our RAID arrays, and we're going to go to a much more complex RAID array, and that'll take at least 30 days of his time. So we plan to produce one, but probably the earliest we could get one out would be March.
Okay.
And then the economic...
Well, Cliff, we're up against the end of the show, and I hate to cut you off.
Oh, that's
You've been
fine.
very,
That's
very
fine.
gracious with your time, as always. You've been a tremendous guest. And when you do another report, and I hope you will, we'll have you back on the Common Sense Show for another dose of depression. Thanks so much for joining us,
there
Cliff.
You go. With pie.
With pie, okay. And everybody else, hey, thanks for joining us. Some great calls tonight. Annie, thank you. And to my producer, Manny Quiros, thanks a lot.